Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome back. I hope you're having an absolutely fantastic day. I hope you're feeling better than I am. I'm starting to come down with a cold. But I thought I would do a serious video, again, about this crew perk update. And I gotta tell you guys, this is the No BS channel where I call it like it is. WarGaming, you guys are trying your best and you are dealing with a bunch of crybabies and a bunch of whiners that are doing nothing but complaining and not providing any positive feedback or giving you any feedback on how to actually do this in a better way. I've never seen so much complaining and whining and oh my god, the sky is falling going on. And I gotta put up my hand right here and say, yes, I have done my share of complaining in this game through comedy and through also legitimate complaining about some BS in this game. There's lots of stuff to complain about. But this crew update complaining has gone over the top. Just look at some of the titles to some of the videos that are made. Killing the future of World of Tanks. Killing the future, okay? Wow. There's an NACC who's got videos of boycott World of Tanks. Stop 1.201 before it's too late. What I see in most of the content, the complaining is three categories, all right? Number one category is just crying and whining. Just ignore that. There's like a lot of inflammatory rhetoric. But there's two categories that are legitimate concerns about this crew update. And the first category is the increased power creep. All right, there's increased power creep being introduced in this game by the virtue of the fact that there's new perks being added, and I'm just on the web page here where I'm highlighting two particular ones that are for the gunner. Concentration reduces the dispersion of a stationary vehicle by 2.5%, so it increases your accuracy. And quick aiming improves aim time by 2.5%. Two new perks which will make all crews better, introducing more power creep into the game. And more importantly, that I found when I looked through all the skills, is some of these orange ones, some of the existing skills we have that are being improved even more. For example, Snapshot, which we already have in the game, which is already a significant perk for a crew member. Right now, Snapshot reduces the dispersion on turret traverse by 7.5%, but for some reason WarGaming is increasing that to 15%. They're doubling the effect of Snapshot, and in fact they are kind of increasing the effect of a lot of the existing skills and adding new ones. Okay, so more power creep into the game. Legitimate concern, okay? Number two legitimate concern is the increased disparity that's going to be caused between tanks that have few crew members and tanks that have many crew members. Because by adding new powerful perks, tanks that have more crew members can gain the experience to achieve these perks faster than tanks that have a small amount of crew members. And if you look at the experience point charts on how quickly you get perks, here's a graph here. The first graph showing the first major qualification is the bottom line right here. And it takes that amount of experience to achieve 100% on your first perk or skill. Then the second one is the red line, the third one is the yellow line, and the fourth one is the green line. And then by the time you get to the fifth, sixth, seventh skill, it's exponential. The cumulative is the bottom graph here. In order to get the sixth and seventh skill on a Manticore, it requires a tremendous amount of experience points. Whereas in a tank that has 4 or 5 members, you can get the similar amount of skills and perks by only reaching 3 or 4 levels. That's a big concern that implementing this new perk system is going to really nerf the tanks that have a few crew members and buff the tanks that have a lot of crew members. And that's broken. We can't do this. And so the overwhelming reaction is this patch is terrible, it's going to kill the game, boycott World of Tanks, inflammatory rhetoric. But boy, we have short memories, don't we? Because WarGaming was keenly aware of this issue. 2 years ago, in fact, when they started this whole process of trying to introduce new crew skills or rework the crew system. Do you remember 2 years ago? This is an old article from 2 years ago, Crew 2.0 update, when WarGaming started this whole process, and they were keenly aware that there would be this unbalance if they kept adding new skills for for tanks with few crew members and tanks that had many crew members. So they tried to implement this system here where each tank would simply have one commander, and I'm showing you one of the iterations that they came up with. You would consolidate the crews of all tanks to one commander, and each commander would get a certain amount of points. In this publication, 80, I think they've fiddled with 75 or 80, and the commanders could pick different talents. Do you remember that? They had a matrix like this of all the crew skills and perks that you could invest the points in. One commander per tank. Do you remember this? And if you invested 30 points, you would get to choose one of these two skills. For example, one that they tested in the sandbox server 2 years ago was, in 5 seconds after you start moving, the concealment of enemy vehicles either moving or behind foliage is reduced by 10%. The effect lasts until you stop. Okay? Does that sound familiar? That one's in the game right now. It's called Commander's Vision System. This one here under gunnery training, this particular one here, is one that they're proposing in this iteration of the crew perk rework. The minimum potential damage and minimum potential penetration values are increased by 10% in 5 seconds after your gun reloads. The effect lasts until you fire a shot. It's basically shell tuning. It's basically the same thing. They've reduced it a little bit, increased the minimum damage and armor penetration by 2%. Now the point is, you can look at all these and decide whether you thought this was, each individual one of these is a good idea or a bad idea. It represented a big change to the game. But the point is, WarGaming understood that there would be a big problem with tanks that had few crew members and tanks that had many crew members if you tried to individualize the crew perks. All right. And that's why they went to this system similar to World of Warships, where each tank would just have one commander. The commander could have a certain amount of points. This article shows 80 points is the maximum number of points a commander could have. So you would have to go in here in this matrix of skills and perks and spend 80 points worth. So there would have been a maximum. This is distributing 80 points worth. And with this 80 points worth, I would be able to choose 2 of these things, but not everything. Now, this particular system, whether you like the individual perks and tactical training, gunnery training, technical training, whether you like these individual skills or not, rather than give WarGaming feedback, this one's too powerful, or I don't like this one, let's make this one a little less powerful. Rather than just give some feedback, everyone just shit all over and said, no, we can't do this. This is going to destroy the game. But if you think about it, the overall concept of having a commander that can get a maximum amount of points and then have to distribute those points among a matrix of skills, this is the maximum distribution. Now I've chosen 80, and this would be, I would have a maxed out commander for a tank. This would actually go a long way to balancing, to adding variety, but also balancing the game, because you couldn't have the Unicoms and professionals, 12-hour-a-day professional streamers, end up with all the perks and skills, and the beginners with none. Eventually, if you played your tank, certain tanks that you really enjoy playing, and you concentrated on those tanks, you could potentially get a commander with 80 points, and you could distribute your 80 points among these skills, and you would be at that level. You'd be equivalent to someone who's played 12 years. A 2 or 3 year player that concentrates on 1 or 2 tanks could end up with a maxed out commander and be on the battlefield with someone who's played 12 years as a career professional streamer, and they would be almost equivalent. Well, all the CC shit all over this. They didn't want this. But now 2 years later, they're using that very argument to argue against this system. This is going to cause imbalance. This one was balanced, and they didn't want it. Now this one is more imbalanced and they don't want it. They don't want anything. Now, there were a lot of other issues with this. I'm not saying that Crew 2.0 was perfect and we should have done it. But the concept, the reason WarGaming went in this direction, similar to World of Warships, WarGaming anticipated that there would be problems adding more crew perks and crew skills and perks because of the disparity between tanks that have few crew members and many crew members. They anticipated that, and that's why they wanted to go to this system, which everyone shit on. So now they've gone back to the drawing board 2 years later, and they still want to add these perks. They're coming out with new content. Some of them you may think are good ideas, and some of them you may think are bad ideas, and that's the kind of feedback that they want. Like, really, should we have a skill here that improves aiming by 2.5%? Should we have a skill here that decreases the penalty to vehicle concealment after shooting by 10%? I mean, is that a good idea? That's the kind of feedback I think they were looking for. So let me just stop here and say, from WarGaming's perspective, they're trying to introduce new things into the game. They want to introduce more variety and more crew perks into the game. Because it is true now that everyone pretty much rushes out to get the same skills. The skills that help you not be seen, the skills that help you see farther, and the skills that help you shoot better, right? Firefighting isn't high on the list. Safe storage isn't high on the list. Everyone pretty much wants to maximize their damage output and their concealment and their vision. So there's not a lot of variety in the crew skills in the game, and WarGaming wants to introduce new ones. So that's a good idea. But how do you do it without destroying the game and boycotting World of Tanks? Well, let me give some no bullshit, no inflammatory rhetoric feedback for WarGaming, because I think it's a good idea that they're trying to bring new content into the game. So number one, the one legitimate concern we have is the power creep. I am against more power creep in the game. I think the more and more you introduce power creep, the more disparity you have between the really good setups and the poor setups, the worse, more imbalanced the game is, the more blowout and meaningless battles you have. So WarGaming, my feedback here, it's fine to add new skills and new content like these white ones, shell tuning, close combat. This is an interesting one. Accelerates gun loading by 2.5% at a distance of 50 meters or less from the enemy. That's kind of an interesting skill. So if you're a brawling tank, you might want that skill instead of something else. But WarGaming, on the topic of power creep, I think what's adding power creep here is not necessarily these new individual skills. They will only add power creep for someone who gets them all, right? And it's going to be very difficult to get them all because it's going to cost exponentially more XP to get them all. And that's what another complaint people have. But power creep, in my mind, is more affected by some of the changes that WarGaming's making to the old skills. So WarGaming, in my opinion, there is no need to rework the orange ones, reworked perk. There's no reason to make Snapshot reduce the dispersion on turret traverse by 15%. Right now, Snapshot reduces the dispersion on turret traverse by 7.5%. So what's the reason for doubling that, other than just introducing more power creep? Do we really need more tanks? Now, snap! There's already a lot of snapping that goes on. I think that some of these reworked perks are adding more power creep to the game because a lot of people already have these, and they will instantaneously have a better tank. If you already have Snapshot on some of your crews, even if you don't change the skills, you will have a better crew after this patch. Deadeye increases the chance of critically damaging enemy vehicle modules and injuring enemy crew members by 10%. Right now, the Deadeye perk, and I will read from the World of Tank Wiki site, increases by a fixed amount 3% the chance that a shot will critically damage enemy vehicle modules and crew with AP, APCR, or heat. It does not work with HE or HESH. Well, they want to rework this one. They say effective with all shell types. That's probably fine. But what's the reason to increase the chance from 3% to 10%? That's just going to be more ammo racks, more fires, more dead crew members. you're tripling that one. More than you're going from 3% to 10%. Now, all of these reworked perks, for really no reason that I can understand, are introducing more power creep. So my feedback to WarGaming is, you want to add some new content to the game, that's great. But why add the power creep? I would dismiss the reworked perks. Just leave them as they are. There's no reason for doubling and tripling the effect of the perks we already have. That's just going to make the game more in balance. Much more of a factor than adding the new perks. Okay, number two. The number two big complaint is the disparity between, I hate to talk about the Manticore, but we have to talk about the Manticore again. The Manticore has 2 crew members. The E50 has 5? I think the E50 has 5, okay? So think of it this way. Remember this chart? The first skill, second skill, third skill. This blue, red, and yellow charts right there. If both an E50 and a Manticore, the first skill they train is Brothers in Arms, they get to 100% for all crew members, Brothers in Arms, at the same time. Even though there's 2 crew members for the Manticore, 5 for the E50, they all train equivalently, and the crew members, the same amount of XP for all the crew members of both tanks to get Brothers in Arms. It's equal when they're going for a group perk. If the second skill that both those tanks crews choose to train is Concealment, then again, they will both gain XP at the same rate, and they will achieve a 2-skill crew at the same time. E50 and Manticore. You got that? That's because all crew members have to have each of these skills. But as soon as you go into the individual skills, now let's use the same example. A Manticore has Brothers in Arms and Concealment, and an E50 has Brothers in Arms and Concealment. They've both followed this blue line and red line. Now, as the third perk, the E50, the commander can get Recon, the radio operator can get Situational Awareness, and all the other crew members can get different individual skills. Just pulling this out as an example. You don't have to get the skills in this particular order. I'm just giving you an example here. Whereas the Manticore, with only 2 crew members, the commander can train Recon or Situational Awareness. You can't train both because the commander is responsible for both. So all of a sudden, the Manticore will achieve maximum vision slower than the E50. You can see that when you start choosing individual skills, the progress of a tank that has fewer crew members is going to slow down significantly. And when you get to the 5th or 6th or 7th skill, let's just keep using the example of an E50. Let's say you get an E50 with a 5-skill crew. You have 5 crew members with 5 skills each. That's 25 skills. Whereas the Manticore, with 2 crew members getting a 5-skill crew, that's 5 times 2. It only has 10. 25 versus 10. That's a huge difference. Now, WarGaming has already introduced things that you can use to mitigate that. You don't realize it, but they have introduced different game products that limit that. They've recently made situational awareness available to everyone because poor little Manticore or tanks with few crew members that's a necessary skill. So you don't have to use the early experience to get that one. That's number one. And number two, there's a whole bunch of these reward commanders, snow maidens, and some of these special commanders that come bundled with 1 or 2 or even 3 skills. And my advice, just a little aside here, if you're playing tanks that have 2 or 3 crew members, those are the best places to put some of those reward commanders like the Arnie or the, Santa Claus, or some of the snow maidens with 2 already trained skills. You put those guys or gals into the tanks with the fewest crew members so that to get a head start. So they've kind of introduced stuff like that so you can mitigate these things. Right? You see a Unicom with driving a Manticore has Santa Claus in as the commander who gets 3 free crew perks, and they don't start the total XP count. All right. So legitimately, there's an imbalance here between tanks that have many crew members and tanks that have few crew members. So how do we fix that? If Wargaming, you want to add more and more and more skills. I think Wargaming wants to add more and more perks so that you can't get them all. They've stated in their articles here that it becomes unreasonable after you get to 6 to continue because the amount of XP required just goes up exponentially here. By the time you get to the 7th perk, you're talking about millions of XP. So how do you balance the, rather than just say boycott World of Tanks and destroy the game, it's the beginning of the end, well, let's give some feedback on how they can balance tanks with few crew members and tanks with multiple crew members. And the easiest way, it's just math, there's many different ways of doing it. The easiest way is to make all of these perks and skills like Brothers in Arms, Concealment, and Repair, so that every crew member has to research them. Think about that for a minute. If you just and that's what they tried to do basically here, where they made just one commander have a certain amount of points. But they could do it with these skills too. They could make all of them crew-wide skills, so that even a 5 crew member tank, all of the crew members would have to research the skills as they go. Now they could lower the amount of XP required, because you wouldn't want to cap the limit to 6. Choosing only 6 would be ridiculous. If you just use the average, let's use the E50 again, you can get an E50 to 5 crew skills would be a really good crew. That's 25 skills. So they could lower the amount of XP. The whole crew would have to train up all those skills. Some of you might not think that's a good idea. It kind of goes against the the feeling that the gunner should have the gunnery skills and the driver should have the driving skills. I understand that, but that's a mathematical way of making all the tanks immediately balanced. Now, of course, the game is already, the tanks are balanced with the system we have now that doesn't work like that. So just introducing that would unbalance everything, because I'm sure that the Manticore has intrinsic concealment and intrinsic properties that try to balance it in the old system that we have right now. So that's just a mathematical solution that probably won't work. It would require a much more detailed rework, okay? But it's a mathematical way of doing it if they wanted to rebalance everything. Another way of doing it is simply to say, well, if we're going to add more perks, and it's going to be harder for tanks with less crew members to get those perks, why don't we just make the amount of XP after a certain amount of perks? There's 3 that the whole crew shares. After the 3rd, maybe tanks with fewer crew members could accumulate XP faster than tanks with many crew members. They could mathematically work that out so that it's more even. Maybe a tank with 3 crew members should gain XP a little bit faster than a tank with 5 crew members. They could put in a little bit of a modifier depending on how many crew members are in a tank to try and balance it a little bit. That's a little bit less complicated. Or what about this? There's another possible solution. They could just give tanks with 2 and 3 crew members a mentor perk for free. Mentor, increase the XP earned by all crew members by 15%. That's one of the perks that exists right now. What about if tanks that have 2 or 3 crew members, the tanks that are going to get hit the most by the imbalance that's going to be introduced here, why not give them a free mentor skill? We all get free situational awareness skill now. Those are just 3 possibilities. And of course, I'm just throwing out some possibilities. And Wargaming could look at those ideas and maybe one of them would make sense, rather than just say, boycott the game, this is all insane, this is destroying the game. Like, what do you expect Wargaming to do? They're just trying to introduce some different crew skills and different crew perks. Practicality decreases consumable cooldown by 15%. Some of you might think, well, that's a good idea, I would choose that one. And if I choose that one, I might not be able to get sound detection. What they're trying to introduce is a little bit of variety in the way we set up our tanks. And I find it ironic that the very complaint we have that this is going to unbalance the game is what WarGaming was worried about 2 years ago when they tried this model, which would have led to a more balanced game, and everyone shit on this too. So WarGaming, I understand your dilemma. No matter which way you try and propose it, a new content into the game, you just get shut down that it's going to destroy the game and we should boycott the game. Like, man, guys, do we have to get like this is the No BS channel, and I got to tell you guys, yes, I have done my share of complaining of certain aspects of the game that I don't like. But there's many things about the game that I really do like. And I remember when they came out with this. Now, I thought that some of these things were a little bit goofy, right? And a little bit weird. And I didn't agree with all the different skills here, but they were testing them. My biggest observation from this iteration 2 years ago was that they would be able to eventually sell and monetize these commanders, which they do on World of Warships. In World of Warships, when you buy a premium ship, it comes with a captain, which you can purchase with a certain number of points. I think the point system there is a little bit different. You can buy a 10-point or 15-point captain rather than going through the process of researching it, right? They would eventually sell an 80-point commander with a premium tank, or a 50-point commander, or a 70-point commander, whichever number of points they would settle on. They would monetize that eventually. And, oh, no, they're going to monetize it. We can't have them monetizing it. So we shut this down. Well, now they just sell crew books. So I promise this will be the last video I do on this crew perk update. A lot of hysterical rhetoric and just the sky is falling nonsense. Adding some new crew perks is not going to destroy the game. And I hope... couple other things we discussed here is number one, WarGaming, please don't introduce more power creep for no reason with reworking some of these old perks. And number two, try and figure out some way of compensating the tanks that have few crew members. Like tanks that have 2 and 3 crew members should get a little bit of a bump in the way they earn XP or something to try and balance that out a little bit. And to all the people that are crying and whining about it now, you had your chance 2 years ago to switch to a system where we would have balance. Like, regardless of what you thought of the matrix of all the crew perks, we would have had balance with this system. You would have had a commander with a maximum amount of points distributed amongst a whole matrix of different skills. We would have had the variety and we would have had the balance. And there would have been a lot more games now with equally weighted tank crews. I think there would have been less blowouts, and the game might have been, it would have been a much different game. You might have not liked this update because of you just did not like the crew perks and the choices that they made available. But this would achieve a much more balanced battlefield as far as crew skills go, because there was a maximum. And beyond this maximum, there was just little incremental gains. Okay? So the CC crowd rejected this, so you don't have the balance. And now that this is proposed, your very reason to hate this is you're going to say it's unbalanced. So you can't have it both ways. So my advice, WarGaming, is just go ahead with your update. Introduce this new content and try and think about some of the actual feedback that's specific to the two biggest complaints, which is power creep and the disparity between few crew members and many crew members. Try and take those two factors. Those are the two biggest complaints that I read about in the forums and I hear in the videos, aside from the inflammatory rhetoric and crybaby stuff. Those are the biggest concerns. Try and be cognizant of those two things and mitigate those two things before you implement. I mean, that's why you're having a test server and a sandbox and you want feedback. That's my feedback, okay? In case you missed it, you have to repeat it again. There's no reason to make Snapshot and Deadeye and some of these old perks more powerful. That's just power creep. And the tanks with only 2 or 3 crew members, once you get on this exponential curve, will be at a big disadvantage. So there's got to be some way of accelerating how they earn XP. Anyways, guys, leave some comments. I'm sure there's going to be many, many, many comments in the comment section on this one. And no BS channel, I call it like it is. WarGaming, you were right. You were thinking about this stuff. You foresaw this problem with the disparity in the crew members, and unfortunately, you're dealing with a lot of crybabies right now, and you should just ignore them and go ahead with your update. Just try and be a little bit cognizant of those two issues that I pointed out. I will catch you guys on the next one.